Just how much equipment does the Ukrainian military have? It's a key question to ask considering that Russian President Vladimir Putin's special military operation is now in its third year, and it's clear his tactic is to throw soldiers at Ukraine until it can't withstand the constant pressure anymore. One of the keys to Ukraine's victory lies in sustaining its military to handle that constant bombardment, which means it needs equipment, a lot of it. So we come to this video review. We're going to divide the review into two parts, the first of which looks at key equipment Ukraine has received from Western allies. After that, we'll take a more general look at what Ukraine has in terms of general numbers, counting tanks, armored vehicles, and everything else its military can bring to bear against Russia. For Western equipment, we turn to the BBC for a list. While by no means exhaustive, it highlights the key weapon systems the West has provided to Ukraine, starting with the next-generation light anti-tank weapons or NLAWs. These are essentially shoulder-mounted rocket launchers that can fire a projectile up to 2,625 feet and are designed specifically to strike moving targets such as tanks and armored vehicles. They're also surprisingly easy to use. A soldier only needs about a day of training to get to grips with the technology. Each one weighs 27 pounds, making it light enough to carry onto the battlefield. Most of Ukraine's NLAW weapons arrived during the beginning of the war, with the national news reporting that around 12,100 of them have been donated to Ukraine as of March 2022. Britain was a major supplier of these weapons. It had sent more than 5,000 NLAWs to Ukraine by May 2022. So it's likely that Ukraine actually received more of these weapons following the 12,100 committed to it early in the war. However, it also lost some. Russian forces, along with members of the pro-Russian Donetsk People's Republic, captured several of the weapons in February 2022. Still, we can safely say Ukraine has over 10,000 NLAWs, which it has used to great effect to tackle Russia's tank-based threat. Next up, air defense systems. The two key air defense systems Ukraine has received from its Western partners are the short-range, British-made Starstreak missile system and the American-made Patriot system. Starting with Starstreak, this tripod-mounted system is portable and can be mounted both on land and in compatible vehicles. The missile this system fires is actually made up of a trio of tungsten darts, which are accelerated to speeds of around Mach 3, meaning they move at 3 times the speed of sound, and use a laser guiding system to improve accuracy for a fire-and-forget experience. This makes them a suitable counter to Russian helicopters, as well as making them capable of taking out many fixed-wing aircraft, including many of the Soviet-era fighters Russia is using in the Ukraine war. As for numbers, the Jamestown Foundation says that Ukraine has received 1,800 Starstreak missiles from its Western allies as of June 2024. The same organization also provides a comprehensive list of other missiles Ukraine has received and may have in stock. That includes 45 5V-55U missiles for its S-300 missile systems, which are the same type of anti-air systems Russia has been using to defend itself. Ukraine has also received 1,000 Pioron man-portable air defense systems or MANPADS from the West, alongside 800 Stinger MANPADS and 100 Igla MANPADS. Then we come to the Patriot system. As of June 2024, Ukraine was known to have 2 of these systems in place, though Voice of America reported in the same month that it was set to receive a further 3 Patriot batteries from the US, Romania, and Germany to bring its total to 5. Zelensky says Ukraine needs more. He feels that having a total of 25 Patriot systems would help Ukraine more effectively fight against Russia. A base unit is capable of firing either 4 PAC-2 missiles or a staggering 16 PAC-3 missiles, with each of those missiles having a track-via missile system built into it to help it reach its target. Each one can travel up to around 43 miles and can pack a warhead weighing 198 pounds. As for missile numbers, the Jamestown Foundation offers some insight. Ukraine has 365 PAC-2 anti-ballistic missiles that have been transferred to the country by Germany, the Netherlands, and the US. Next up is the M777 howitzer. Several countries have provided these GPS-guided artillery systems, including the US, Australia, and Canada. Each has a range of 25 miles, which matches the Soviet-era 2A36 Gyatstint B howitzer Russia is using, with the key advantage being that the M777 is far more accurate. Ukraine had 190 of these howitzers in May 2024, according to Forbes, with each being capable of firing 155mm shells weighing up to 100 pounds. However, other figures contradict this number. For instance, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, claims that Ukraine has received around 352 howitzers from its allies. The Forbes figure seems to more closely align with the number of howitzers provided by the US and Canada, which have combined to deliver 152 according to CSIS, so perhaps Forbes was focusing solely on North American donors. There's also the HIMARS artillery to consider, which can fire shells up to 50 miles, though the range is much higher if it's equipped with US-supplied ATACMS missiles. Ukraine had 39 of these HIMARS launchers, which have proven troublesome for Russia. It had failed to destroy a single one as of January 2024. Let's touch on ATACMS themselves, which are long-range missiles Ukraine could conceivably use to conduct strikes into Russian territory. They aren't the only long-range missiles Ukraine has. The country has also received British-made Storm Shadow missiles and French-made Scalps, which are essentially the same missile. It's unclear how many ATACMS Ukraine had, though Forbes reported it had received a shipment of around 20 at some point during 2023. It's a similar story with Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles. Numbers are hard to come by, though we do know that French President Emmanuel Macron pledged 40 Scalp missiles to Ukraine in January 2024. That was on top of an unknown number of Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles already sent to Ukraine, so their numbers may exceed 100 at this point. Next, we move on to tanks. Ukraine has received three main types of tanks from its Western allies: the American M1 Abrams, Challenger 2 tanks from the UK, and German-made Leopard 2 tanks from its European and American allies. Starting with the M1 Abrams, the tank is crewed by 4 people, one more than a typical Ukrainian main battle tank needs, and weighs 67 tons. Its Cobham armor protects it against direct hits, and the tank comes equipped with a gas turbine engine that requires more fuel than a similar tank, but gives it more power on the battlefield. Ukraine doesn't have a ton of these tanks. The US agreed to send 31 back in January 2023 and doesn't appear to have sent any more since. Like the M1 Abrams, the Challenger 2 is a 4-crew tank, though it's even heavier than its American equivalent. It weighs 75 tons and is also equipped with Cobham armor. Interestingly, despite being British-made, the tank uses non-NATO standard ammunition. Like the US, the UK agreed to send a batch of these tanks to Ukraine in January 2023, though these numbers were a little lower, at 14 compared to the 31 Abrams. Finally, there's the Leopard 2, which is another 4-person tank which matches the M1 Abrams in that it weighs 67 tons. Unlike the Abrams, it uses a special composite armor to deflect fire, and it has an advantage over the Challenger 2. The tank fires NATO standard 120mm rounds. That means practically any NATO-aligned country can provide ammunition for the tank, even if it isn't able to provide the tanks themselves. It's believed that Ukraine has a little over 130 of these tanks, with Germany, Poland, Sweden, Canada, and Denmark being among the providers. Ukraine has also received a large number of Leopard 1 tanks, likely over 270, with 88 coming from Germany and a further 80 being pledged by Denmark in March 2023. These tanks haven't had as much of an impact on the Ukraine war as was anticipated. Russia has the advantage in terms of sheer numbers, and the tanks have proven less impactful in counter-offensives than other measures, such as drones. Speaking of drones, Ukraine has received several types from its Western allies, starting with the Turkish-made Bayraktar TB2. Made famous by a viral war song composed by Ukrainian soldiers in the drone's honor, the Bayraktar TB2 is capable of firing missiles and has proven to be an effective force against tanks and armored vehicles throughout the war. Ukraine doesn't have many of these drones. Breaking Defense says it had around 20 TB2s at the start of the war and has since been reported to have received around 50. However, there's a caveat to that number. It's possible that some of the frameworks received were inoperable. Far more present on the battlefield is the Switchblade, which is a US-made kamikaze drone of which Ukraine is believed to have around 700 units. Dubbed the loitering munition system by its manufacturer AeroVironment, the drone's specs vary depending on the variant received. The Switchblade 300 can stay in the air for up to 20 minutes and has a range of about 18.6 miles. As for the Switchblade 600, it bumps the range up between 24.9 and 56 miles, with the ability to stay in flight for around 40 minutes. Both can pack powerful munitions, though the Switchblade 600 is the far more devastating of the two. It can carry up to 33 pounds of munitions. That makes the Switchblade 600 especially effective for anti-armor purposes, such as kamikaze attacks, as well as dealing with Russian personnel. Then there's the DJI Mavic drone. Unlike the other two drones, the DJI Mavic is a commercial surveillance drone that isn't capable of attacking the enemy. What it can do is reach a maximum speed of 42.5 miles per hour, which, when combined with its tiny 11.1-inch wingspan, makes it extremely difficult to target when it's moving. The drone can travel up to 18.6 miles and can reach a maximum altitude of 19,685 feet, making it incredibly difficult to spot by eye alone. Interestingly, the drone is made by a Chinese manufacturer, which has sold around 8,200 of them to Ukraine as of May 2024. The final item on the list of donated weapons to Ukraine is a big one: fighter jets, specifically F-16 fighter jets. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has spent much of the war pleading for these powerful American-made fighters, claiming that Ukraine will need 128 of them to properly fight against Russia's aerial superiority. Ukraine doesn't have that many. In fact, the first 18 months of the war were marked by Zelensky's repeated pleas for the jets and America's refusal to supply them. The US finally relented, though it isn't providing the F-16s itself. Instead, it's permitted other NATO allies to give F-16s to Ukraine, with the CSIS stating that several NATO countries have since joined forces to commit 65 F-16s to Ukraine. Again, that's less than half the amount Zelensky claims his forces need, but it's a start. Extensive training of Ukrainian pilots was also required before those F-16s could be utilized, with the first jets taking to the skies in early August 2024. With that, we wrap up our examination of the main weapon systems Ukraine's Western allies have provided since the outbreak of the war. From here, we take a more general approach, examining the country's stockpiles by weapon type rather than specific weapon systems. And that begins with a piece of equipment that Russia has consistently used to try to establish dominance on the ground: tanks. Like Russia, the majority of Ukraine's tank stock was made up of Soviet-era vehicles, with a handful of more modern tanks thrown in for good measure. For instance, Ukraine has around 28 T-55s at the start of the war, along with 42 T-62s. However, its main tanks were the T-64 and T-72. It has almost 1,300 of the former, including its variants, and 867 of the latter, with 117 of its T-72s being the Avenger model. As for the more modern tanks, it has a paltry 5 T-84s, which is one of the few tanks Ukraine builds itself, as well as a stockpile of 14 T-90 tanks that it bought from Russia prior to the war's outbreak. Add around 60 PT-61 Twardey tanks from Poland into the mix, along with the Western-supplied tanks we covered earlier, and Ukraine has a fairly impressive tank force when it comes to sheer numbers, around 2,700 in total. However, it should be noted that most of these tanks are the older Soviet-era models that are ineffective against modern weapon systems. Of course, that may not present much of a problem for Ukraine, as Russia has also been forced to rely on these older tanks as the war has progressed, with thousands of them falling victim to Ukrainian rocket-propelled grenades and drones. From tanks, we move into armored and utility vehicles. Starting with armored personnel carriers, or APCs, and infantry fighting vehicles, or IFVs, this was an area where Ukraine fell vastly short of Russia during the early days of the war. Before the war, the country had around 2,000 Soviet-era APCs and IFVs, which was enough for the Ukrainian army of the time. The problem is that the size of Ukraine's army has doubled since the beginning of the war, reaching around 900,000 active soldiers. Add to this APC and IFV losses, which Forbes estimates at around 1,000 as of April 2024, and Ukraine's stockpiles were dwindling at a time when it needed more vehicles. It wasn't helped by some of its allies being extremely slow to provide APCs and IFVs. Canada, for instance, announced that it would donate 89 Bison armored vehicles, which have a combat load of around 27,400 pounds and can carry 2 people. Those vehicles can be equipped with a range of weapons, including M72 rocket launchers, a 7.62mm C6 medium machine gun, and a 76mm grenade dispenser with multiple barrels. The first 39 of these Bisons, all of which were used in current Canadian military stock, arrived quickly. As for the other 50, which were enough to transport an entire battalion, those would be built new and took around a year to arrive. The situation improved as more of Ukraine's allies started donating vehicles. Now, Forbes believes Ukraine has received around 7,500 APCs and IFVs since the beginning of the war, as well as restoring around 10,000 Soviet-era vehicles that had previously been mothballed. That would give a total of 19,500 with the initial 2,000 the Ukrainian military had available. However, there's a caveat. Ukraine had likely lost around 5,000 of its APCs and IFVs as of May 2024, putting it down to around 14,500. Still, it's at least getting quality, even if it isn't matching the sheer quantity of Russia's APVs on the battlefield. Statista reports that almost 2,000 of the vehicles Ukraine has received are American-made armored Humvees, along with several hundred Bradley IFVs, armored AUVs, M113 APCs, and a host of other vehicles. Ukraine will likely need at least 1,000 more, however, as it moves towards mobilizing greater troop numbers. There's a clear pattern emerging here. Ukraine has a lot of equipment, which is being supplemented by its allies, but it still falls short of Russia in terms of sheer numbers. The key for Ukraine comes in quality. The weapons it's been receiving from the West are generally better than much of the Soviet-era equipment Ukraine would be forced to field if left to its own devices. Plus, Western equipment is generally better than the equipment Russia is fielding overall. Next up, we come to artillery systems. CSIS says that Ukraine started the war with 1,150 Soviet-era howitzers, with 350 of those being 122mm howitzers, while 750 were 750mm. Adding around 424 donated howitzers from Western allies, which includes the 352 mentioned earlier, plus around 70 older or smaller ones, and you get a total of around 1,600 artillery pieces. While this may seem like a lot, it's worth considering that the majority of these artillery units are still Soviet-era. That creates ammunition problems as the shells aren't readily available, forcing Ukraine to increasingly rely on its Western artillery units to combat Russia. Speaking of shells, the US has been helping Ukraine in that regard. CSIS says that America scoured the globe to find Soviet-era shells it could acquire on Ukraine's behalf, resulting in it sending 45,000 152mm shells and around 20,000 122mm rounds. That may be the limit. Russia and China are the main producers of these types of shells, and neither is going to be supplying them to Ukraine anytime soon. CSIS also says that the amount of artillery Ukraine needs doesn't align with the amount it has. It says that the combined border Ukraine needs to defend is around 1,550 miles, roughly working out to 1 artillery unit per mile. For comparison, West Germany deployed 2,400 heavy artillery pieces to defend the 1,367-mile borders with East Germany and Czechoslovakia during the Cold War. Not quite 2 units per mile, but far closer than what Ukraine has achieved. Artillery shell supplies are also a huge challenge for Ukraine. Though we don't have exact numbers beyond those for the Soviet-era shells the US has managed to acquire, Ukrainian officials stated back in May 2023 that it required around 20,000 artillery shells per day to use its Western-supplied units to their full capacity. Lawfare says it was receiving nowhere close to that. It had enough shells to fire around 9,000 per day at the time, with those numbers having dropped to around 2,000 per day since. So Ukraine is doing a lot with relatively little, the story of its achievements during the war. Next, we move on to the country's aerial capacity, and it's here where we start to see a major shortfall. The 65 F-16s mentioned earlier couldn't come soon enough on the fighter jet side of things, as Ukraine fell far behind Russia in this regard during the early days of the war. According to the UK publication The Evening Standard, Ukraine had 105 MiG-29s, Su-24s and Su-25s in February 2022, along with around 50 Su-27s. Anybody who knows their fighter jets will be able to tell you that all of these fixed-wing craft are Soviet-era, with their numbers also being far lower than the literal thousands of these jets, plus more modern variants, Russia was able to field. For context, the most modern of these fighters is the Russian-made Su-27 MiG-29, which both entered production in 1982. Both were designed to counter the American F-15 and 16, though neither ended up beating them. As for the Su-24, it entered service in 1974, with production of the jet ending in 1993. It's a similar story with the Su-25. That jet entered service in 1978, with production ceasing in 2017. The end of production, combined with both of these jets also being Russian-made, presented problems for Ukraine, as it's difficult to source replacement components for maintenance. Hence why Zelensky says Ukraine needs even more F-16s. The situation was even worse on the helicopter front. Numbers are difficult to come by here, though it seems likely that Ukraine has a little over 100 helicopters in total. The MiL-Mi-24 makes up the largest portion of its stockpile, with 45 of these attack choppers being in Ukraine's Air Force. Capable of flying 8 passengers, the chopper is a Soviet-era gunship that entered service in 1972 and is currently used by 58 countries. Ukraine also has 22 MiL-Mi-17 choppers, which were introduced in 1975 and are typically used as transport helicopters, though there are variants capable of acting as gunships. Collectively, those 2 helicopter designs, which are around 50 years old, make up over half of Ukraine's available helicopter stock. Russia should have destroyed Ukraine in the aerial battle. However, that's not what we've seen in the war so far. According to Ukraine's Ministry of Finance, Russia has lost 367 planes and 328 helicopters fighting against Ukraine. For context, that's around 3 times the number of planes and helicopters Ukraine has available in its entire air force, with the losses being so bad that Russia has essentially abandoned all attempts to exert its aerial dominance. So Ukraine may not have many fighter jets and helicopters, but it also hasn't needed them for defensive purposes so far. The arrival of 65 F-16s into Ukraine will thus give it more opportunities to launch attacks on Russian positions. Perhaps it may even find a use for its Soviet-era aircraft during those assaults. Still, this brings us to the next category we're going to examine: anti-air defenses. Russia's lack of success on the aerial front comes down, in part, to Ukraine having exceptional anti-air capabilities. Ukraine recognized the importance of maintaining a strong anti-air arsenal in the wake of Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014. According to the Jamestown Foundation, May 2014, which came 3 months after the annexation, saw 2 Ukrainian organizations, the Center for Army Conversion and Disarmament Studies and the Defense Express, combined to conduct a study into Ukraine's anti-air capabilities. That study was titled On the Decline, Partial Loss of Ukraine's Defense Potential 2004 to 2014, and it found some positives and far more negatives. On the positive side, the study found that Ukraine had around 5,000 guided anti-aircraft missiles in its stockpiles. These included about 1,000 5V-28 missiles for its S-200V anti-air systems, along with 3,000 5V-55s for its S-300P and 800 9M83 missiles for its S-300V. Throw in a further 1,300 9M38 and 9M38M1 surface-to-air or SAM missiles, and you have a pretty large stockpile. But there was a problem. The same study found that most of Ukraine's missile systems had reached the end of their service lives without being properly extended, meaning the majority of these missiles were useless. The S-200s and S-300Vs were even in the process of being decommissioned, leaving Ukraine with thousands of missiles it couldn't properly use when the war broke out. All told, it seems that Ukraine had around 250 S-300P anti-air systems that were actually usable, several of which it's since lost due to Russian attacks. Forbes says that Ukraine was losing S-300s at a rate of several per week back in April 2022, though it's likely the loss rate has slowed down since. It's receiving more in drips and drabs. For instance, January 2024 saw Greece approve the transfer of a small number of S-300 systems to Ukraine, despite opposition from Russia. Still, the situation didn't look good. That's why the Patriot and Starstreak systems mentioned earlier have proven so important to Ukraine, as have the huge number of missiles the country's Western allies have provided. According to the Jamestown Foundation, Ukraine had received 4,885 anti-air missiles of various types by June 2024, which is almost the same amount of missiles it had stockpiled before the war. Only these missiles are usable in the anti-air systems Ukraine has available. Next up, we come to drones, or unmanned aerial vehicles. We've covered the large number of drones Ukraine has received from its Western allies, along with the thousands of commercial drones it's been able to procure from Chinese manufacturers. However, those drones only scratch the surface, as Ukraine has switched its focus to manufacturing UAVs domestically. In March 2024, Reuters reported that Ukraine already had 10 companies working on manufacturing drones that would be capable of reaching Russian cities such as Moscow and St. Petersburg. Some of those drones would have ranges of around 620 miles, a range category that simply didn't exist before the Ukraine war began. If nothing else, this showcases how crucial drones have become to Ukraine during the war. And about a month later, solid numbers started emerging. March 2024 saw the Kyiv Independent report that Ukraine has developed the capacity to manufacture a staggering 150,000 drones every single month. Assuming it maintained that capacity throughout 2024, it would have around 2 million drones by the end of the year. Perhaps more, in fact, as the country's Strategic Industries Deputy Minister, Hanna Vozdiar, was quoted at the time as claiming that Ukraine is already well past the million mark in terms of production. Beyond the 10 companies focusing on long-range drones, a further 200 had become involved in drone development, with 60 of those already having received large orders from Ukraine's government. It gets even better on the UAV front for Ukraine. The same report noted that NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg revealed plans for a massive uptick in the amount of drones being supplied to Ukraine by its Western allies. He estimated that donated numbers would reach 1 million by the end of 2024. Add to that the 1 million Ukraine already had, and the extra million it looks set to produce by the end of 2024, and you get 3 million, about 3 drones for every active member of Ukraine's military. These drones can serve a host of purposes, from simple reconnaissance to launching full-scale attacks on Russian equipment. It's also unclear whether this production includes unmanned underwater vehicles and similar sea drones, which have proven especially effective in helping Ukraine tackle Russia's Black Sea Fleet. Which brings us to the final category we'll examine: naval assets. There aren't many, as Ukraine's only coast extends into the Black Sea, which Russia ostensibly controls. Global Firepower, or GFP, which releases annual rankings of the military strength of 145 countries, says that Ukraine's navy has 104 assets. About a third of its navy is made up of small patrol vessels, with 33 in the fleet, and Ukraine has no submarines, aircraft carriers, destroyers, frigates, or corvettes. Those patrol ships include the P-153 Priluki, which is a former Matka-class missile boat, alongside some small gunboats like the Zhuk 1400M class and the Po-2. But beyond that, Ukraine barely has an attacking navy to speak of. The other 71 naval assets include 4 landing craft, 3 mine warfare vessels such as a pair of Sandown-class ships, and an assortment of special-purpose vessels including supply, survey, and tugboats. And with that, we complete our in-depth examination of the quantity of military equipment Ukraine has available, as well as the quality of some of the best pieces. We have, of course, missed out some of the basics, such as small firearms and helmets. We can safely assume Ukraine has over 1 million small arms and rifles, simply by virtue of its military containing 900,000 active members, with similar numbers likely for helmets, body armor, and similar supporting gear. But what do you think about these numbers? Are they enough to help Ukraine win the war, considering how much more Russia's military has? Or does Ukraine's intelligent use of this equipment give it the edge over the invading Russian forces? Tell us what you think in the comments, and thank you for watching the video. Now go and check out why all Russian weapons are a failure, or click this other video instead.